Carl Jung left us a message as powerful as it is unsettling. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. In this phrase lies one of the most transformative secrets of human existence. Everything you experience, every emotion you feel, every relationship you attract, is deeply tied to what dwells in the depths of your psyche. It's precisely in that inner world where the shadows reside, those repressed parts of yourself that, if not illuminated by the light of consciousness, will manifest disguised in your everyday life. Self-love, far from being a mere motivational phrase, is the force that can clear the path of those shadows. Because how can you know if you truly love yourself if you're not even aware of the parts of you that you've denied, repressed, or feared facing? Jung taught us that the shadow is that part of our personality we hide because it feels uncomfortable or because our surroundings taught us it wasn't acceptable. But what we ignore is that by repressing our shadow, we give it power over our lives. Imagine for a moment that you're walking down a fog-covered path. You can't see clearly what's ahead. You just move forward, guided by a faint light that barely illuminates the ground beneath your feet. That light is your current consciousness. If you don't expand it, you'll keep tripping over the same stones, making the same wrong decisions, and attracting the same people who, in one way or another, reflect the shadows you haven't yet recognized. Now pause and ask yourself, what part of me do I still reject? Maybe it's that inner voice telling you you're not enough, the fear of being alone, the need for approval, or even the tendency to self-sabotage every time you're about to achieve something big. Jung would say these patterns aren't mere coincidences, but the result of an unresolved dialogue between your conscious and unconscious mind. But here's where the true power of self-love comes in. It's not the simple act of repeating affirmations in front of a mirror or indulging in little treats to feel better momentarily. True self-love is the conscious decision to look within, to face your shadows and to integrate every part of your being without rejection or judgment. It's the act of shining your own light on those dark corners that have remained hidden for years. How can we start this process? First, it's necessary to understand that everything you deny in yourself, you'll project onto the outer world. Jung called it psychological projection, a mechanism of the unconscious through which we attribute to others the qualities or flaws we don't want to recognize in ourselves. Have you ever felt a deep aversion to someone without a logical reason? Have you been frustrated by people who seem to challenge everything you consider right? What bothers you in others is often a reflection of what you haven't accepted in yourself. That's why, many times on life's path, we encounter relationships that seem destined for suffering, people who drain us emotionally, manipulate us, or simply seem to hinder our growth. Yet we stay there, trapped in bonds that slowly destroy us. But Jung offers a different perspective. Those relationships aren't punishments or coincidences. They're mirrors of our own shadow. They show us where we still need to heal, what wounds remain open, and above all, what parts of ourselves we keep rejecting. Here's where self-love becomes the key to transforming our reality. When you start to truly love yourself, you stop accepting what doesn't resonate with you, not because you become arrogant or selfish, but because you begin to understand your true worth. The light of your self-love not only illuminates your path, but also dissolves the disguised shadows you once mistook for love, friendship, or loyalty. Often we cling to relationships and situations out of fear of loneliness. But Jung invites us to see loneliness from a completely different perspective, not as a punishment, but as an opportunity. Because only in solitude can we truly meet ourselves, free from the distractions and expectations of the outside world. It's in those moments of introspection that we can see clearly what parts of ourselves we've been denying and what we need to do to integrate all the pieces of our being. Now, the most important question is, how do we illuminate our shadows to let the light of self-love guide our path? Recognize the repetitive patterns in your life. If you constantly end up in relationships that hurt you, in jobs that don't fulfill you, or in situations that seem to steal your peace, stop and ask, what is this teaching me about myself? What part of me keeps attracting these experiences? Observe without judging. One of the biggest mistakes we make is punishing ourselves for our own shadows. But Jung taught us that the unconscious doesn't respond to judgment. It responds to understanding. Instead of rejecting what you discover within, look at it with compassion. Become conscious of the unconscious. This is the true work of individuation, the central process in Jung's psychology. It's not about becoming perfect, but about integrating all parts of yourself, both what you consider good and what you consider bad. Set boundaries from self-love. Often, our inability to establish clear boundaries stems from not recognizing our own worth. When you truly love yourself, you don't allow anything or anyone to make you feel less than you are. Accept solitude as a stage of self-discovery. Don't run from loneliness, embrace it. It's in those moments that you can truly discover who you are, what you want, and where you want to go. Act from authenticity. When you love yourself, you stop seeking external approval and start living from your truth. And here's the secret. When you live in alignment with who you really are, everything in your life begins to naturally fall into place. Self-love isn't a destination, it's a path that requires introspection, courage, and commitment to yourself. Above all, it's a path that illuminates your life and frees it from disguised shadows. Disguised shadows appear in our lives in many ways. Sometimes they present as relationships that seem to fill us with love, but actually keep us trapped in a dynamic of dependency. Other times they hide behind our own insecurities, preventing us from seeing ourselves clearly, recognizing our worth, and making decisions that truly benefit us. The problem is that most people don't know how to recognize these shadows because they've learned to live with them as if they were part of their identity. But they're not. You're not the person who needs constant validation from others. You're not the person who must endure mistreatment just out of fear of being alone. You're not the person who settles for less than they deserve. However, until you make the origin of those patterns conscious, they'll keep repeating over and over again. That's why self-love isn't just a pretty concept. It's deep inner work. It's not about telling yourself you're worth a lot while still letting others treat you as if you're not. It's not about loving yourself only when things go well, but learning to respect yourself even when everything seems to crumble around you. The true test of self-love happens in tough moments, when you have the choice to fall back into the same old dynamics or to choose something different. Carl Jung taught us that the unconscious has a very particular way of getting our attention. It places us in the same situations again and again until we learn the lesson. If you don't learn to set boundaries, you'll keep attracting people who cross them. If you don't learn to listen to yourself, you'll keep being surrounded by people who try to silence you. If you don't learn to value yourself, you'll keep accepting crumbs of love, friendship, and recognition. The problem is that many people confuse resistance with strength. They think being strong means enduring more, tolerating more, trying harder. But true strength isn't in resistance, it's in detachment. It's in the ability to recognize when something is no longer for you and having the courage to let it go. Because letting go isn't giving up. Letting go is an act of self-love. When you decide to let go of what harms you, something inside you shifts. You stop needing others' approval because you realize the most important thing is being at peace with yourself. You stop forcing relationships because you understand that the most valuable connections are those that flow naturally. You stop acting from fear because you start trusting that life will bring you what you truly need at the right time. But here's where most people stumble. Letting go isn't easy. It means facing your deepest fears. It means accepting that some things didn't work out as you hoped. It means being willing to leave behind what's familiar, even if it hurts you. And that's terrifying. That's why so many prefer to stay in relationships that destroy them rather than face the uncertainty of being alone. They prefer to stay in jobs they hate rather than risk seeking something better. They prefer to settle for a mediocre life rather than confront the void of the unknown. But here's the truth Jung taught us. That void isn't the end. It's the beginning. It's the space where you can rebuild yourself from scratch, free from the external influences that have shaped you all your life. It's the place where you discover who you really are, beyond others' expectations, beyond the roles you've played, beyond the masks you've worn to fit in. When you start walking this path, something magical happens. You begin to notice that what once seemed important no longer matters, that the people you once admired no longer inspire you, that the places where you once felt comfortable now feel strange. It's not that the world has changed, it's that you have. And when you change internally, your external reality transforms too. But this process comes at a cost. Not everyone will understand your transformation. There will be those who try to convince you you're wrong, who mock your growth, who try to make you doubt yourself. Because when you change, you force others to face their own shadows, and not everyone is ready for that. This is where you must make a choice. Stay in the same old circle, surrounded by the same people, trapped in the same patterns, or dare to walk alone for a while until you find those who truly resonate with you. The light of self-love is the beacon that guides you in this process. And the most important thing to remember is that you're not alone. Everyone who's chosen this path has felt fear at some point. Everyone has doubted themselves. Everyone has had to let go of something they loved. But without exception, they've all discovered that on the other side of fear lies a life they never imagined possible. What's holding you back isn't a lack of opportunities, love, or resources. What's holding you back is the fear of letting go of what no longer serves you. And until you face that fear, you'll stay trapped in the same old stories. Carl Jung taught us that life isn't about avoiding suffering. It's about learning to give it meaning. If you're going through a tough time, instead of asking why this is happening to you, ask what you can learn from it. What part of you needs healing? What shadow are you ready to integrate? Because when you manage to give purpose to your pain, you stop being a victim of circumstances and become the creator of your own life. If right now you feel there's something in your life that no longer fits, it's a sign you're ready for a change. Maybe it's a relationship that makes you feel small. Maybe it's an environment that limits your growth. Maybe it's a version of yourself you no longer want to play. Change is scary, but living a life that doesn't resonate with you is even scarier. You have within you the light needed to dispel any shadow, but no one can light it for you. It's a choice only you can make. In the next part, we'll explore how to detect the unconscious signals telling you when it's time to let go, how to distinguish real fear from the excuses your mind creates to keep you in your comfort zone, and how to reprogram your psyche to attract relationships and experiences aligned with your true essence. When you start listening to your inner self, you realize something you overlooked before. The signals have always been there. The problem is that we often ignore them because we don't want to face what they really mean. It's easier to convince ourselves everything's fine, that things will get better with time, that we should be patient and tolerant. But the truth is, the unconscious doesn't stop sending you messages just because you choose to ignore them. It'll find other ways to manifest. And those ways aren't always subtle. Sometimes the unconscious communicates through discomfort, that inexplicable feeling that something's off, even when everything seems normal on the surface. Other times it shows up as emotional exhaustion, that fatigue you feel when you're around people or in situations that don't nourish you. And sometimes the message comes more forcefully. Illnesses, emotional crises, unexpected losses. All of this is just a wake-up call to pay attention to what you've been ignoring for too long. Carl Jung taught us that every time we deny a part of ourselves, that part doesn't disappear. It hides in the shadow, waiting for the moment to come to light. And it will sooner or later. The question is, will you be ready to face it when that moment comes, or will you keep running? What's curious is that we often cling to the very situations that hurt us simply because they're familiar. We prefer the known, even if it makes us suffer, over risking the unknown. But if you truly want to transform your life, if you truly want to experience self-love in its fullest expression, you must be willing to leave behind everything that no longer resonates with you. That includes people, habits, beliefs, and the hardest of all, the version of yourself you've been until now. Because the person who's tolerated pain, who's let others trample their emotions, who stayed in places where they weren't valued, that person must stay behind. You have to say goodbye to that version of yourself to make way for a new one that respects itself, listens to itself, values itself. But this process isn't instant. Jung said individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey that requires patience, introspection, and above all, courage. Because on this path, there will inevitably be moments of doubt. There will be days when you'll want to turn back, when fear will make you question if you made the right choice. And that's when you must remember that growth isn't always comfortable. In fact, it often feels like a total collapse, like everything you believed in no longer makes sense, like you're losing control of your life. But what's really happening is that you're letting a part of yourself die that you no longer need. And that, though painful, is necessary. The only way forward is by letting go. But letting go doesn't mean forgetting or denying what you've lived through. It means learning from it, thanking those experiences for what they taught you, recognizing how they helped you grow, and then moving on without carrying that weight. Because when you keep carrying past stories, you don't leave space for the new. The most beautiful part of this process is that once you allow yourself to let go, the universe responds in unexpected ways. Suddenly, you start attracting people who truly value you, situations that enrich you, opportunities that once seemed out of reach. Not because they weren't there before, but because you're now on a different frequency. You've raised your energy, and that completely changes how you interact with the world. But here's the most important thing. You can't expect the world to change for you. You can't expect people to treat you better if you don't treat yourself with respect. You can't expect to receive love if you keep acting from lack. You can't expect to find happiness if you keep clinging to what hurts you. The change must come from within. Self-love isn't a goal you reach and that's it. It's a daily practice. It's how you talk to yourself, how you decide what to tolerate and what not to. The commitment to choose yourself over and over again, even when it's hard, even when others try to make you doubt. This is the moment to ask yourself an important question. Are you willing to choose yourself? Are you ready to stop waiting for others to give you what you must give yourself? Because when you make that decision, everything changes. You no longer seek external validation because you understand your worth doesn't depend on anyone else's opinion. You no longer settle for half-hearted relationships because you know you deserve something genuine. You no longer feel the need to convince others of your value because you simply embody it. And the most incredible thing is that when you start living from this place of authenticity, the whole world responds differently. The people who once took advantage of your vulnerability no longer find a space to do so. The situations that once seemed chaotic start to fall into place because you've finally taken control of your own life. If right now you feel something inside telling you it's time to change, listen to that voice. Don't silence it, don't ignore it. It's your intuition guiding you toward the life you truly deserve. A life where your self-love lights your path, dispelling all the shadows that once kept you trapped. And when you decide to walk with that light, you discover that everything you ever sought outside yourself was always within. When you truly start listening to yourself, paying attention to what you feel deep inside, you discover something that changes everything. You've always known what's best for you. You've always felt when a situation wasn't good for you, when a person wasn't sincere, when you were betraying yourself. You learned to ignore that inner voice because the world taught you it was more important to fit in than to be authentic, that it was easier to settle than to risk losing, that it was better to endure a little longer than face the uncertainty of the unknown. But all that has a cost, and that cost is your peace, your energy, your self-love. The problem is that many people don't realize this until they're completely exhausted, until they feel empty inside, until they look at their life and see they've spent years accepting less than they deserve. And in that moment, desperation starts to creep in because they no longer know how to change, how to let go of what's been with them for so long, even though it's destroying them. But here's where the power of consciousness comes in. Carl Jung taught us that the first step to transforming anything in our life is to make it conscious. You can't change what you don't understand. You can't let go of what you haven't even identified as a burden. That's why, before taking the next step, you need to look inward with absolute honesty. Ask yourself, how many times have I let fear dictate my decisions? How many times have I silenced what I really feel out of fear of others' reactions? How many times have I stayed where I knew I didn't belong? Because until you answer these questions with sincerity, you'll stay trapped in the same cycle, repeating the same mistakes, attracting the same people, falling into the same patterns. And that's not a coincidence. It's how your unconscious shows you what you haven't yet healed. But here's the good news. The moment you decide to face this, the moment you say enough and choose to start living differently, everything changes. Not because the world suddenly becomes easier, but because you no longer react the same way to what happens around you. The people who used to manipulate you no longer have power over you. The situations that once seemed uncontrollable stop affecting you. The fears that paralyzed you start to fade. Because true transformation doesn't happen when you try to change what's outside, it happens when you change what's inside. And one of the most powerful transformations you can make is learning to let go without fear. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean erasing what you've lived or denying what you felt. It means accepting that some things have already served their purpose in your life, that some people came to teach you something but aren't meant to stay, that some situations were necessary at the time but no longer have a place in your present. But letting go is hard because it means facing uncertainty. It means accepting that you don't have all the answers. It means trusting that what's coming will be better even when you can't see it yet. And here's where the deepest work comes in: trusting yourself, trusting that you're strong enough to endure the process, trusting that you don't need to cling to anything or anyone to feel complete, trusting that no matter what happens, you'll always be okay because you have yourself. The problem is that most people have never learned to trust themselves. They've always sought security outside, in a partner, a job, others' approval. But Jung taught us that true security can only be found within. When you truly know yourself, when you understand your own light and shadow, when you've worked on your self-love from the deepest level, then nothing can break you. Not because life stops having challenges, but because you've built the inner strength to face them without losing yourself. But this takes practice. It requires reminding yourself every day that you deserve better, that you don't need to cling to what no longer nourishes you, that self-love isn't just a nice idea, but a decision you must make every day, with every action, every word, every thought. Because the reality is this: the world won't change to make you happy. People won't magically transform to treat you better. Situations won't adjust to your expectations just because you want them to. The only thing you can change is yourself. And when you do, when you truly change from within, you discover something incredible. What used to hurt you no longer has power over you. What used to make you doubt no longer has space in your life. What once seemed impossible to let go of now feels like a weight you can finally release. And in that moment, everything falls into place. The right people start coming into your life, not because they didn't exist before, but because you now have the clarity to recognize them. The opportunities that once seemed out of reach appear before you, not because they weren't there, but because you now have the confidence to seize them. And most importantly, you start to feel peace, a peace that doesn't depend on what's happening outside, but on the certainty that, no matter what, you'll always be okay because you've learned that true strength isn't in resisting, but in letting go. It's not in clinging, but in releasing. It's not in seeking answers outside, but in looking within. And when you do, when you truly choose yourself without fear, without doubts, without excuses, then everything changes. Because in the end, life always reflects what we carry inside. The only question is, what are you willing to reflect from now on? When you truly decide to choose yourself, you start to notice something curious. Many things that once seemed normal now feel heavy, uncomfortable, out of place. Places where you used to feel at home now seem strange. Conversations you once held without issue now feel empty. People you used to share your time with now seem to move on a different frequency. It's not that the world has changed. It's not that people are worse or that everything around you is broken. What's changed is you. What's changed is your level of consciousness, your ability to perceive what truly resonates with you and what doesn't. And though this awakening can feel liberating, it can also be painful, because it means you must leave behind many things you once clung to. This is one of the hardest moments on the path of self-love. Accepting that growth involves goodbyes. Goodbyes to old versions of yourself, to dynamics you used to tolerate, to bonds no longer aligned with your new way of seeing life. And this is where many turn back, because letting go of the old means facing an empty space. It means walking without a safety net. It means trusting that, though it doesn't seem like it now, something better is on the way. But the fear of the unknown is one of the biggest obstacles in anyone's life. Jung taught us that the collective unconscious, the programming we've all grown up with, makes us believe that security lies in what we know, that the stable, predictable, familiar things that have been there for years are what give us stability. Yet the paradox is that often it's exactly those things that keep us trapped in destructive patterns. True security isn't in what you already know. It's in your ability to trust yourself no matter what happens. It's in knowing that even if everything changes, even if people leave, even if the path is uncertain, you'll still be there for yourself. And that's the key that sets you free. Because when you understand this, you stop seeking outside what you can only find within. You no longer need others' validation because you've learned to validate yourself. You no longer need someone to choose you because you've chosen yourself. You no longer fear being alone because you know true loneliness isn't the absence of company. It's disconnection from yourself. But reaching this point requires going through moments of doubt, uncertainty, and goodbyes. It requires feeling the discomfort of letting go of the old before the new arrives. And this is where many give up, where they return to what they know, even if it hurts them, because it's easier to tolerate the bad that's familiar than to face the unknown. Yet if you truly want to transform your life, if you truly want to discover what it means to live with self-love, you must be willing to hold that discomfort. You must be willing to trust that, though you can't see it clearly now, every step you take in this direction is leading you to a better place. And little by little, over time, you start to notice the changes. You start to feel that you no longer react the same way to what used to hurt you, that certain conversations no longer interest you, that others' opinions don't affect you like before, that peace has become your priority, and that, for the first time in a long time, you feel you're exactly where you're meant to be. This process doesn't have a definitive end. It's not that one day you wake up and everything's resolved. It's a daily practice, a choice you make in every moment, every interaction, every decision. But if there's one thing certain, it's this. Once you've awakened, you can't go back. You can't settle for less than you know you deserve. You can't keep ignoring what your intuition screams at you. You can't keep betraying yourself. And in that moment, when you accept your own light, when you stop seeking outside what was always within, you discover the most important thing of all. Life isn't about finding someone to love you, achieving external success, or fitting into someone else's mold. Life is about learning to love yourself on every level, with all your shadows and all your light. And from there, building an existence that truly makes you feel alive. And that, without a doubt, is the greatest liberation you can experience. As you move forward in this process, you start to notice that everything that once worried you or made you doubt gradually loses its weight. Others' opinions no longer dictate your decisions. Relationships that once seemed indispensable now feel like simple experiences that have run their course. You no longer cling to what doesn't flow because you've understood that when something leaves your life, it's because it's no longer aligned with your evolution. But the most striking thing of all is that as you change, the world around you changes too. What once seemed impossible to let go of becomes a memory of the past. What used to be a constant struggle now flows naturally. And the people who once made you doubt your worth fade away, making room for new, more authentic connections aligned with who you truly are. Here's where many finally grasp the most powerful truth of all. It was never about changing others, finding external validation, or fighting for the world to accept you. It was always about returning to yourself, recognizing yourself, accepting yourself, living from your own truth without fear, without excuses, without masks. Carl Jung showed us that when we decide to face our shadows, to illuminate the parts of ourselves we've repressed, to stop acting from fear and start living from authenticity, everything starts to fall into place. Life becomes lighter, energy shifts, opportunities arise, because we've finally stopped resisting who we really are. And this is something very few people get to experience. Not because they can't, but because they stay trapped in fear, doubt, and the comfort of the familiar. But today you have the chance to choose something different. You have the chance to let go of the weight that doesn't belong to you, to walk with the certainty that everything you need is already within you. Now I want to ask you a question. Are you ready to take that step? Are you ready to release what no longer resonates with you and open yourself to a life more aligned with who you truly are? If this message resonated with you, I invite you to join this community. Leave your comment below and tell me what part of this touched your heart. Share this content with someone you know needs it, because you never know the impact a single message can have on someone's life. If you haven't already, subscribe and hit the bell to keep receiving more content like this. Your interaction not only helps this message reach more people, it also allows us to keep growing on this path of self-discovery and transformation. Remember, every time you choose your peace, every time you decide to love yourself a little more, every time you let go of what no longer serves you, you're illuminating your own path. And when your light shines, you inspire others to do the same. See you in the next video. Until then, keep choosing yourself, keep growing, and above all, keep trusting in the incredible person you are. Thanks for being here.